Salam. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui. Before episode 11 begins, we pause and look back from episode 1 to episode 10 and hold the whole journey in one clear picture. We do this because episode 11 is metagrammar. It is about the rules we use to discover, justify, constrain, test, stabilize, and archive rules. If we forget what we already built, we will repeat ourselves, contradict ourselves, or weaken the discipline that kept this program honest. So, this is one continuous story in everyday language, but still strict. It is not a list of episode titles. It is the single thread we have been weaving. What we questioned, what we chose as a root, what we demanded as proof, what we refused to assume, and how we ended up with a language that can be measured, tested, and used responsibly. Episode 1 begins with the oldest question, stated in a sharper way than usual. What is real, in the sense that it remains real when our instruments change, our mathematics improves, our theories are replaced, and our scale of vision expands? Episode 1 treats this as a survival problem for knowledge. If we cannot separate reality from comforting story, progress becomes a loop. We keep rebuilding the same confusion with new vocabulary. We keep mistaking explanation for understanding. We keep calling each new patch fundamental, while the structure underneath remains fragile. So episode 1 makes a hard move. It asks the listener to suspect that our usual primitives might not be the true root. We often begin with matter, energy, forces, space-time, and fields, and then add new entities to repair cracks. Episode 1 says, what if that habit is not strength, but a symptom that we started in the wrong place? What if there is a deeper primitive, not simpler as easy, but simpler as one coherent source? That is where phi enters, the holophase, a single continuous cyclic order field. Episode 1 does not present phi as a decorative symbol. It presents phi as a disciplined proposal. Reduce primitives, derive consequences, and expose failure conditions. Episode 1 also sets a moral rule that guards the entire journey. No claim is allowed to become sacred. Holophase must invite killing. If phi is wrong, it must be possible to show it is wrong. If it is right, it must become more precise under pressure. Episode 1 trains an attitude. Do not trust confidence. Trust procedures. Ask for operational meaning. Ask what would falsify the claim. Ask what prediction must hold if the claim is true. Episode 1 plants the seed of an epistemic oath. Our work is not to win arguments, but to build a method that survives scrutiny. Episode 2 answers the first practical objection. If there is one root, how do we read it? Episode 2 says the doorway is change. If phi never varied, there would be no structure, no difference, no pattern, and no measurement. So we read phi by studying how it changes. This is where calculus stops being a school tool and becomes a language of questions. In simple terms, how fast is phi cycling here in time? And how is phi varying here across space? Episode 2 names the time change signature omega and the space change signature k, and shows how motion appears as the organized propagation of change. Episode 2 also teaches a subtle but crucial rule. Only differences matter. If you add the same constant phase to phi everywhere, the physical meaning does not change. What matters are relations, gradients, and changes. Humans love absolutes because absolutes feel stable, but episode 2 trains the opposite instinct. Relational structure is primary. This protects us from fake absolutes, and it aligns with how instruments actually work. A clock compares cycles. An interferometer compares phase differences. A detector compares signal changes. Measurement is comparison. Reality, as we can access it, is revealed through comparisons. Episode 3 adds the first strong constraint. A language with letters but no grammar can describe anything and therefore predict nothing. Episode 3 says, if omega, k, and motion come from the same phi, then they cannot be chosen independently. Temporal reading, spatial reading, and motion reading must agree. If a proposed pattern implies contradictions across these linked aspects, it is ungrammatical. This is where the program gains teeth. It can reject a claim by consistency, not by preference. It can say, that cannot be a lawful sentence of the world, because its time shadow and space shadow cannot both be true. Then episode 3 teaches how to kill a theory. This is not negativity, it is responsibility. Many big frameworks protect themselves by becoming vague, so they cannot be pinned down. Episode 3 does the opposite. It trains the listener to demand failure conditions. After every idea, ask, what would prove this wrong? And also, what must we observe if this is right? Holophase invites killing precisely because it wants to be a tool, not a belief system. Episode 3 shapes the listener into someone who can love truth more than identity, and who can treat being wrong as progress. Episode 4 deepens the language by adding resolution. First derivatives tell us that phi changes. Higher derivatives tell us how the change itself changes. Bending, accelerating, twisting, converging, dispersing, and other styles of evolution. In everyday language, episode 4 says, reality has style, not just motion. If we want a language that can read reality finely, we need more letters than the first ones. Each higher derivative level is like asking a sharper question about what the pattern is doing and how its behavior evolves. Episode 4 also prepares the listener for complexity without chaos. Complexity can be structured if the language is structured. Episode 5 is the long bridge that makes triunity feel real. For centuries, people imagined time as a flowing river, space as a container, and motion as something happening inside the container. Episode 5 calls this the prologue. It does not mock it, it shows why it was natural. Humans experience time as flow, space as room, and motion as travel. But episode 5 then changes the frame. In a phi-first view, time is a readout of rhythm in phi, space is a readout of structured variation in phi, and motion is a readout of propagation. These are not independent ingredients. They are linked phases of one underlying change. Episode 5 also brings the lab into the story. Our best instruments do not measure absolute time and absolute space the way old stories imagine. They compare cycles, compare phases, compare arrival times, compare correlations, compare frequencies. Even when we say we measure the distance, we often mean we compared signals and timing and inferred a structure. So a phi-first approach is not an artistic overlay. It matches the logic of measurement. Episode 5 closes the dimensional story by making the listener comfortable with a new truth. Time, space, and motion are not three separate mysteries. They are three linked ways to read one changing field. Episode 6 marks a turning point. Holophase becomes a curriculum, not just a philosophy. Episode 6 introduces the master tree, phi as the trunk, derivative branches as the alphabet of change, higher branches as higher resolution questions. The canopy stays open to remind us the language is infinite in principle. But episode 6 also teaches practical humility. Experiments never hand us the whole infinity. We access finite fragments, finite jets, and we must not pretend otherwise. This prevents grand claims from outrunning what the data truly supports. Episode 6 installs the teaching anchor, the language mantra. 1. Phi. Change creates letters. Each derivative level casts linked temporal, spatial, and motion echoes. Today, we focus on one branch. We test what we claim. This mantra is not decoration. It is a control system for clarity. It prevents drift and protects the listener from losing the spine of the program while learning details. It turns the project into a learnable language rather than a fog of inspiring sentences. Episode 6 clarifies the difference between a code and a language. A code is a fixed mapping from symbol to thing. A language is generative. A small set of rules can generate endlessly many valid sentences. With phi, an infinite derivative hierarchy, and constraints that filter allowed patterns, the universe can be treated as a generative language. A wave is a sentence. A stable repeating pattern is a sentence that persists. A defect is a sentence with a countable twist. Episode 6 makes a careful promise. We will not only talk about this language, we will learn to speak it. Meaning, we will learn to write down claims that can be checked and rejected. Episode 7 turns vocabulary into fluency. It makes identity operational. In everyday life, we call something the same by habit. A person, a river, a storm, a song. Episode 7 says, in Holophase, sameness means a stable derivative fingerprint across time, space, and motion. Identity becomes testable. If the fingerprint does not persist beyond tolerance, then the thing has changed, or your model is wrong. This moves what a thing is from metaphysical comfort to empirical discipline. It also teaches a new kind of respect for the world. You cannot claim sameness by desire. You must earn it by stable structure. Episode 7 also makes meaning tri-dimensional. A pattern's rhythm matters, its spatial structure matters, and its propagation character matters. Two patterns can look similar in one projection, but differ in another, and that difference is not a footnote. It is part of the thing. Episode 7 deepens triunity into the dimensional echo principle. Every derivative level casts three linked shadows, a temporal echo, a spatial echo, and a kinematic echo, and these form interwoven towers throughout the hierarchy. So the three echoes are not only the first lesson, they are the repeating rule that stays true as we climb higher. Episode 8 is a cleansing step that protects universality. After literacy grows, the danger is confusion, mistaking writing style for reality. Episode 8 defines the language in its pure form. Phi is cyclic order. Shifts do not change meaning. Closure and winding are structural, not decorative. Episode 8 insists on representation independence. Different coordinates and parameterizations can describe the same sentence. Therefore, a serious science needs canonicalization, a way to translate different writings into a shared form so different people can truly compare results. Episode 8 sharpens the idea of invariance. If a law is real, it should not vanish when you change coordinate charts. If a structure is real, it should have signatures that survive reasonable transformations. This makes the listener more careful and more powerful at the same time. Careful because they stop worshipping notation. Powerful because they can recognize equivalences and reduce false disagreements. Episode 8 also prepares the ground for standards. A civilization-grade program cannot rely on personal style. It needs shared definitions, stable symbol usage, and methods for showing when two expressions mean the same thing. Episode 9 installs the engine. Generative grammar. Instead of treating laws as static rules written on top of objects, Episode 9 treats laws as production rules that evolve phi. Given a state, a rule generates expected next states. Laws become machines with input-output commitments. Episode 9 strengthens the central ethic. Every rule must come with a prediction spine and a falsification spine. If you cannot say what must happen if you are right and what would force revision if you are wrong, you have not earned the right to call it a law. Episode 9 also reframes cosmogenesis without finishing it. It changes the mental picture. The beginning can be treated as an initial phi sentence unfolding under grammar, not merely an explosion into emptiness. That matters because it changes what we look for. If the universe is generated by grammar, then early structure is not pure chaos. It is constrained writing. Episode 9 also prepares engineering responsibly. If grammar generates stable patterns, then intervention might be possible, but only through disciplined cooperation with stability, not through reckless force. Episode 10 is where the program becomes operational. It turns the whole journey into a ladder for measurement and safe intervention. It begins with the simplest truth of engineering. You do not control what you cannot measure. So episode 10 starts with phi sensing and reconstruction, turning messy sensor data into a defensible phi map. It insists on uncertainty as a moral requirement. Every map must include how sure you are and where you are not sure. Otherwise, you will fool yourself, and once you begin intervening, small self-deception becomes large harm. Episode 10 builds measurement discipline step by step. First, sensor honesty. Instruments have noise, drift, bias, and limitations. If you ignore that, you build a fake reality. Second, calibration and standards. If two labs cannot compare results, science fragments into private stories. Third, derivative measurement in practice. You estimate time change and space change signatures, but you show stability under method changes and attach error bars. Fourth, robust invariance. You do not claim defects because an image looks dramatic. You claim defects because the signature is countable and stable under reasonable transformation. Episode 10 introduces licensed windows in everyday terms. You must declare the conditions under which your claims were valid. If coherence falls below a threshold, you do not pretend your inference remains trustworthy. This prevents fake universality. Episode 10 then adds safety through digital twins. Before touching a real system, build a calibrated model that predicts. Test it on held-out data. Examine residuals. If it fails, you do not hide it. You treat failure as information about missing structure, wrong assumptions, or insufficient resolution. Episode 10 then introduces phi programming as constraint programming. You write intentions, but the language refuses unsafe or unphysical requests. A compiler translates intent into actuator actions, while respecting hardware limits and system grammar. An operating system manages resources, time slots, spatial regions, coherence budgets, and isolation between concurrent processes so they do not destroy each other. The listener learns a new kind of engineering discipline, not brute force, but coherence-aware control inside declared safety limits. Episode 10 expands into foundries, meaning platforms where patterns can be written and tested. It expands into materials as frozen patterns, field shaping as coordinated coherence, and topological engineering as operations on robust defect structures. It introduces patches, local edits of effective behavior, but only with containment and reversibility because uncontrolled patches invite runaway harm. It introduces mesoscopic simulators as wind tunnels, safer analog systems where risky ideas can be tested without paying the highest price first. Episode 10 ends with stewardship. If this language becomes powerful, it must not become a tool of chaos. It must remain auditable, reproducible, and ethically bounded. It must have archives that preserve not only results, but methods, uncertainties, calibration details, and failure cases. It must teach that coherence is not just a physics word, it is a safety law. Actions that drive destructive dissonance tend to collapse systems. Actions that maintain constructive alignment tend to stabilize systems. Episode 10 therefore treats responsibility as part of the technical method, not a decorative paragraph at the end. When we hold episodes 1 through 10 as one picture, the spine is simple and strong. Episode 1 chose a disciplined route and demanded falsifiability. Episode 2 made the route readable through change and treated derivatives as letters. Episode 3 imposed grammar and taught how to kill a theory. Episode 4 increased resolution through higher-order questions. Episode 5 rebuilt intuition about time, space, and motion as linked readouts. Episode 6 established the master tree and the mantra that prevents drift. Episode 7 made identity operational. Episode 8 protected universality through invariance and canonical form. Episode 9 demanded predictions and welcomed falsification. Episode 10 built the operational ladder from sensing to safe intervention. Another way to see the arc is to watch the listener transform. In episode 1, they are a curious person with a deep question. In episode 2, they become a student of change and measurement. In episode 3, they become a student of constraints and consistency. In episode 4, they become a student of higher order detail. In episode 5, they become a student of triunity, learning not to separate what the root ties together. In episode 6, they become a language learner, no longer satisfied with slogans. In episode 7, they become a reader who can track identity through stable signatures. In episode 8, they become a careful scientist who separates meaning from notation. In episode 9, they become a rule tester who demands predictions. In episode 10, they become a responsible engineer who will not touch reality without uncertainty accounting, safety gates, and reversibility. Now we stand at the door of episode 11. We have a language and we have power. Episode 11 must therefore become the epistemic firewall, the system of meta rules that decides which rules are legitimate, how uncertainty exists at the rule level, how competing models are compared fairly, how equivalences are detected across representations, how claims are stabilized over time, and how the lineage of every rule is recorded so any future mind can audit, reproduce, or reject it. That is why we looked back. We did not look back to celebrate. We looked back to remember our standard. So episode 11 begins clean, strict, and worthy of the power we now hold. To make episode 10's meaning concrete, the program changes the listener's relationship with error. In ordinary speech, we say, the instrument measured X, and we move on. Episode 10 says this is not enough. Every measurement is a blend of signal, noise, model assumptions, and processing choices. If you hide those choices, you hide the real meaning of the result. So episode 10 teaches disciplined reporting. What sensor was used, what calibration was applied, what pre-processing was done, what reconstruction method was chosen, what uncertainties were estimated, and what alternative reconstructions were tried. This discipline is not bureaucracy. It is what turns data into shared knowledge. Episode 10 also adds a clear safety posture. Never jump from observation to intervention without intermediate checks. These checks are easy to say, even if they can be hard to perform. First, replicate the reconstruction. If one method finds a pattern, but another method does not, the pattern may be an artifact. Second, test prediction on fresh data. A real rule should predict what happens next, not only fit what already happened. Third, use a digital twin. A twin is not a fantasy world. It is a calibrated surrogate that is forced to match the measured behavior inside declared limits. You use the twin to test actions before you take them. Episode 10 also organizes engineering in layers. At the lowest layer is sensing. You learn to read phase differences, gradients, and temporal rhythms in data streams. Next is reconstruction. You build a consistent phi map with uncertainty from raw outputs. Next is identification. You decide what class of sentence you are observing, and you reject rival interpretations when the data requires it. Next is control. You learn how to apply small, measured pushes that keep the system inside a coherence budget. Finally comes design. You learn how to build stable structures by writing within grammar, not by fighting it. This matters because episode 10 is where the program stops being only a way to interpret the world and begins becoming a way to build. Building is not automatically good. Building without discipline is often the fastest route to harm. So episode 10 expands the meaning of ethics beyond moral preaching. Ethics becomes a set of operational constraints. Declare uncertainty, publish failure cases, respect coherence thresholds, isolate risky experiments, avoid irreversible actions, and never hide assumptions. The simplest ethical rule becomes: do not create a system you cannot explain, test, and stop. Episodes 6 through 10 also create a hidden backbone: the fight against drift. Drift happens when people forget definitions, blur categories, and gradually turn precision into vague slogans. The language mantra prevents drift at the teaching level. Canonicalization prevents drift at the notation level. Licensed windows prevent drift at the measurement level. Prediction and falsification prevent drift at the theory level. Digital twins and rollback prevent drift at the engineering level. When these safeguards are absent, programs become cults, not sciences. When they are present, even a wrong idea can be useful because it fails cleanly and teaches. This is also why the program repeatedly dethrones energy as the ultimate primitive. It does not deny that energy is real as a measured quantity. It denies that energy should be the first word in our story. In the Holophase sequence, energy becomes a readout of structured change, a derived tally, not the root source. This shift matters because it reduces metaphysical confusion. It stops us from treating a bookkeeping quantity as the substance of existence. In everyday language, it stops us from saying everything is money when money is only the accounting record of deeper activity. By the end of episode 10, the listener holds a new kind of confidence. It is not the confidence of someone who thinks they know everything. It is the confidence of someone who knows how not to lie to themselves. They know how to ask what a symbol means operationally. They know how to demand consistency across time, space, and motion readings. They know how to recognize when a claim is untestable. They know how to insist on error bars. They know how to prefer robust invariants over fragile visual impressions. They know how to treat measurement as comparison and theory as a disciplined compression of what comparisons keep repeating. Now, when we say we are about to begin episode 11, we can state the reason without drama. The next danger is not that we lack power. The next danger is that power can outpace legitimacy. Episode 11 exists to prevent that. Episode 11 will ask, when two proposed rules both fit current data, how do we choose? When a rule seems stable in one lab but not in another, what should we conclude? When different coordinate choices produce different-looking equations, how do we test whether they are truly different or merely different writings of the same structure? So we look back now, not to celebrate, but to remember the standard. We began by refusing sacred claims. We trained measurement literacy. We trained grammar constraints. We trained falsification habits. We built a language with an infinite tree, but finite experimental access. We protected meaning against representation tricks. We demanded prediction. We built safety gates for intervention. Episode 11 will now formalize the firewall that makes all of this auditable, comparable, and civilization proof. Peace be upon you.